Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening to you all. Welcome, and we're happy that you could join us. And if you're watching this as a recording, likewise, welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute. Usually our experience is that there's a few other people who are filtering in just past the top of the hour. So what we'd like to do is invite you actually to chat where you are joining us from in the world. So if you just go to the chat bar and just let us know where you are joining us from as we just wait a couple of minutes here and then we'll get started. So please go ahead, and if you're just joining, please chat us where you are joining from. So it looks like we have Canada, the US, Germany, wonderful. Lima, Peru, wonderful. A couple of folks in Germany, Austin, Texas, Florida, Canada, hello, New York City, Colorado, welcome, Washington, DC, welcome. So again, if you're just joining, please let us know where you are joining us from. We'll wait another few seconds here for others to filter in, but it's wonderful to have you.
Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Great. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome. My name is Rich Fernandez. I am the CEO of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. If you're not familiar with that, we are a nonprofit educational institute that was originally developed at Google, hence the name Search, as in Google Search, Inside Yourself. We focus on mindfulness and emotional intelligence skills for individuals, communities, and organizations around the world, operating in 50 countries. We spun out of Google about 8 years ago as an independent, standalone nonprofit, and that's where we are today, offering these practices broadly in the world, like I said. And I am so thrilled to invite our friend, colleague, advisory board member, Toussaint Bailey, to our conversation today. And so I'm gonna share Toussaint's bio in a second. I also wanted to introduce Grace Edmonds, who is part of our team here at SIYLI. She is our Zoom master today, so she'll be answering any questions, technical questions, also fielding some of the questions that come in through chat and Q&A. So welcome, Grace. So Toussaint, like I said, I'm so happy you could join us. And if you can indulge me for a second, I just wanted to share a little bit of your bio with folks, and then we can get into the session, which, by the way, as you all know, and because you've registered for it, is focused on how mindfulness and emotional intelligence practices support equity and inclusion at work. So we have a lot that we can explore there, and Toussaint has been a thought and practice leader in that space, I would say. But before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit about Toussaint. So Toussaint is the CEO of Enso Wealth Management, and currently a lot of his focus is really on, as you like to say, community, building the community, nurturing a sense of community, and building the infrastructure at Enso, at your organization, to empower their people to, I love this, simultaneously be their best and do their best work at Enso Wealth Management. You're a student, Toussaint is a student of the science of well-being and emotional health. And you're going to hear a lot today about how Toussaint has been bringing those types of practices into his leadership at Enso. And in terms of background, Toussaint is an attorney and previously worked in the financial services, advising professionals who are transitioning from brokerage to being independent entrepreneurs offering financial advisory. And previous to that, he was a practicing attorney for over a decade in both Los Angeles and San Francisco, ultimately leaving the law to become the CEO of Enso Wealth Management. The best part of it all, I love in your bio, Toussaint, you say that your main occupation is that you enjoy being the dad to 3 little superwomen who are very young, I know, and also being a partner with the grown-up superwoman who somehow you convinced to marry a mere mortal.
Greatest accomplishment. You could have started there and ended there.
That's great. That's great. So welcome, my friend. We're so happy you could
Thank
join
you.
us.
It's
Yeah.
always a joy to connect.
Yeah, great. Well, listen, so I actually wanted to start to your last point there, more on a personal note. So um, I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about your own journey with mindfulness, with these kind of aspects of emotional health and well-being. How did you get into this? Why has this been important for you?
Yeah, so it's important, has grown. My mom has always been someone who enjoyed the sciences of mind, kind of gravitated toward that direction, but I didn't pick my own practice up personally until late 2015, early 2016. I stumbled into the book Search Inside Yourself. I came to it through some, I think, lawyers group that was talking about well-being, and I didn't even know it was. I saw emotional intelligence, and I saw all these outcomes that Search Inside Yourself was seeking to provide, but didn't know it was all built on mindfulness until I first, I think, registered for the class and then bought the book. And I'm one of those people who goes through the book and tries everything. And so I went through the book slowly, tried everything. I ended up buying the audiobook and loved that. And I went to a 2-day course, and it was at that 2-day public course where I knew I was no longer going to be an attorney. I hadn't had that much internal quiet time. I don't think in my adult life, in the space that I had around kind of my thoughts, in the kind of quiet to think, just brought to me that, what I was doing, I was a litigator, was fulfilling while I was doing it, but I had gotten to this point where it no longer served me. And my difficult conversation that you model in the 2-day course was the conversation with an attorney who I had just hired, and talked to her about where the firm was headed and the fact that I was going to have to backtrack and tell her that I was going somewhere. So it took me a year to actually make good and leave. But that's how I came into it professionally. And from there, my practice has grown. It's grown to serve my work. My wife has picked up a mindfulness practice now. All of my colleagues at least do this while we engage at work. So it's been something that's been transformative for me, and it's really been something that's served me through some of the difficult moments that we're feeling now, politically, racially, and sort of socially through the country. So
Yeah,
yeah.
well, thank you for sharing that. In fact, if we could pick up on that very last point, if you don't mind, then how then do these practices in your experience? How have they allowed you to kind of, as a leader and as a person, engage with some of these challenging things that are arising around equity, around inclusion, and around division, quite frankly? And not just in the United States, because as you see on our chat, we have people from all over the world, right? So if we think about equity and inclusion as a practice, how has this, in your experience, been helpful in that regard?
Yeah, so to me, the beauty of mindfulness, and one of the promise of mindfulness, is an increased capacity to sit in non-judgmental awareness, whether that's of something outside of us or something internally. And I think it took me being at this stage in my practice to see my internal experience around inequity, injustice, division, for what it is. And so I think it's been through my mindfulness practice that I really come to recognize a lot of what I'm feeling as grief. And I had that moment in the wake of George Floyd's death, or killing, where I really became intimately familiar with my internal experience, and actually to the point that I was able to articulate that out in a way that I hadn't before. And so what I've been kind of reflecting on, and what I've been sharing, is the value of really recognizing the loss of humanity. So not just the loss of a human being, but the loss of humanity in the way we engage with one another, the loss of the ability to show up as fully human at work if you're in one of those underrepresented or oppressed classes, really is something that can cause grief. That recognition allowed me to sort of move through those stages with intentionality. First coming to a place of acceptance, following some of those other affects that come up, and then after acceptance, I know David Kessler, one of the co-authors of the 5 Stages of Grief, now has this book around finding meaning as this 6th stage, and I really do think that's been an experience that's allowed me to start my own healing, and I've been finding meaning through meaningful action in attempting to kind of make my own impact on inclusion and belonging and to a lesser extent equity. But that's been my healing. I've been healing by healing others, or at least attempting to support the healing of others. And I can genuinely say I've been able to stay in an uplifted place. All of that stuff sits on top of my mindfulness practice. I think some of not only the recognition of what's going on inside, but also as I moved through these new practices into these new domains. I work in financial services. Prior to that, I was a lawyer. So to muster up the courage to go out and talk to people about increased capacity for empathy, or go out and talk to people about reevaluating the value of their stories, that's a vulnerable space for me. So I'm also having to internally track what's going on as I step out into this new world, and speaking confidently about what I know to be true inside, outside. All of that requires a lot of awareness, a lot of intention not to judge my own internal experience, intention not to judge others. So the mindfulness practice has been everything.
Wow, you said so much there. Thank you so much. And I would actually invite, we'll certainly have time for Q&A, also more towards the end. But as we go through this, since you are sharing so much, I'd invite the audience, if you have any comments or questions, we'll be monitoring those, send those through the chat as well. Because I feel like my job is really to moderate a conversation, certainly between us, but also with the audience, because these are very important topics. So to continue then in that, thank you for so thoroughly highlighting the personal practice and how it helps inform your work with equity and inclusion. If we continue that path of exploration, on the other side of it, how's it going? Like, how is that then being received, right? You started something called the Just Listen project, where I think you describe it as a way to have a human conversation about race. And so tell us how's it going? Tell us about Just Listen. What are you seeing the impact of this work?
Yeah, I can genuinely say it's given me, and I think others who have shared the experience with me, access to an uplifting conversation about a very difficult topic. So the Just Listen project at its core is about intentional sharing and intentional listening to personal story. So part of this came out of what we saw in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's killing, which was vigorous and sort of loud protest. Some of those went into the realm of riot, and some of the back and forth was about that method of communicating frustration. And it was, and one of the quotes that you heard a lot around that time, that I heard a lot, was rioting is the language of the unheard. And that was sort of to explain away some of the frustration and anger. And where my mind went wasn't the justification for that method of communication. Where my mind went was, why don't we hear people? Like, if it's the language of the unheard, let's not just accept as matter of fact that people are going to remain unheard. And so I started to reflect on my experience of being heard for the first time on the issue of race at work. Part of that was me kind of working through trauma, working through fear, working through my kind of perceptions of how that conversation would be perceived to speak up. And another part of that, some of the follow-on conversations were talking to people who I have loving and trusting relationships with, about how they could show up for me, and sort of hear me without needing to jump to action, without recentering conversations on them. And so part of that awareness that I had coming out of those conversations was on the person listening. I saw a sort of increased capacity for empathy and increased understanding for my own experience as an underrepresented minority in my workplace. But I also saw an unexpected sort of healing in myself, just getting that story out. And I suspected that it also had something to do with having an audience, a non-Black or a majority audience for these stories I was sharing. And so I made a decision at some point to try to share that experience with others, both showing my own conversation and reproducing my own conversation, but also helping people through having these conversations themselves. And so, the conversations are about really reappraising the value of stories of people of color, like having them, like some of this is internalized racism, and having people really kind of reevaluate the value of getting their own stories out, reevaluating the value of those storytellers who may have been dehumanized. And also on the other side, reevaluating the value of just listening. So listening with the intent to empathize, walking through, listening to stories about race and racism, listening to stories about the full humanity of people who might not feel welcomed to show up fully, particularly in the workplace. And so as we've had those conversations, I've seen some transformative effects. And one of the things that I asked the listeners to do at the end of the conversation is become sharers of the stories that they've heard. And the first listener talked to me about his sharing experience, and it was he shared with a person who he deeply loves, but who he had contentious conversations with in the past about race and politics. And the emphasis of the project is on the sharing of personal stories and keeping it very human to human. And so he shared my own human story, first kind of vouching for who I was and our interactions and who he knows me to be as a person. And then he talked about some of my experiences with racism that I shared with him. And the response of this person who he loves, who he'd had all these contentious conversations with, was, I can't argue with that. And then they just sort of had a moment. And to me, I don't know what came of that seed that's planted there, but there's something that's planted there that can be watered in a way that a back and forth conversation about, where he's trying to do her work and educate her, arguing her into being either non-racist or anti-racist. It's a different sort of access point to a new conversation. So it's been powerful, and I've heard that feedback repeatedly.
Yeah, I love that idea that it's sort of passing on sharing of stories, right? Of like common humanity and the experience of everyone involved in this conversation. It's not just a one-to-one conversation; it's a one-to-many conversation. It sounds like
it's a pebble, and there's a pebble in a pond with many, hopefully many ripples. And there's also there's also, going with that same sort of figurative thinking, there's also ripples. And I call it the Just Listening Project, but I'll tell you a little secret that I don't think people are going to end up just listening. I think they're going to end up doing, but starting at this place of listening and starting at this place of empathy just creates a different quality of action than jumping to act. Keeping with the idea of us grieving this loss of humanity. I think there's a lot of bargaining going on, where people are looking for a checklist. What can I do to sort of fix right now without moving through what they feel and then coming to a place of meaningful action that's not only meaningful in terms of its impact to others, but meaningful in terms of the internal experience of the actor. And I don't think you can jump over feeling this stuff first and then accepting where we are and then getting to this really human level and then taking action from that point.
Wow, that's beautiful. And we have a great question here, actually, about how to go a little deeper in this concept of the first step being truly listening with the intention to understand. So from Carolyn in the chat asks, how do you help someone to deeply listen? What are the words you've used or the steps you've asked them to take in order to do so?
Yeah, so a lot of it is about creating a seemingly unnatural conversation. So at the outset, we talk a lot about not recentering the conversation on the listener. We talk about the value of just listening, and some of that can be through offering a script of very few words, even affirmative words, to say in response to something very powerful that you might hear, something very painful that the listener might hear. A lot of the upfront coaching is around the idea of just sitting and creating space, and really creating that space and shifting that dynamic is a yielding of privilege, right? It's a yielding of privilege to occupy that space. And there's a gift in that yielding that even starts at asking for this conversation. And so vulnerability and asking for the conversation, being clear about what this conversation is. I just want to hear about you. And that's why I've been referring to this as rehumanizing work. Part of leaving someone unheard, or leaving part of someone's human experience, a key part in the professional workplace. Often it's the part that relates to the deep cultural aspects of us, whether it's a person of color, whether it's a gay or lesbian person. Even if you start to invite those people into the workplace from a diversity perspective, there's an extra step to inviting those people in from an inclusion perspective, and inviting aspects that the underrepresented hold near and dear of their culture, inviting those aspects into the workplace. And so to me, like the offering of space for those aspects of people and someone's full humanity requires a clear intent to just listen, a reappraisal of the value of those stories. So for both people, we're talking about these stories as something that have the power to move, these stories as something that have the power to increase one's capacity for empathy on one side, and provide healing on the other side. But really, it's the training in deep listening is really, so structurally, it's about a very limited conversation on one part. From a feeling standpoint, it's about really paying attention to one's own internal experience and regulating one's own internal experience while listening, and also looking for clues and listening to feel into the internal experience of the sharer. So that piece of it is about going beyond kind of the facts of the story, believing that the story from the sharer's perspective, believing the feelings underneath that story, and believing the truth of those feelings, and really trying to pay attention to the feelings that are informed by the facts that you're hearing, and the internal feelings that you're having, and kind of regulating those as you move through. I typically haven't done the listening coaching for these conversations. There's a therapist who I work with who is a phenomenal listener, who has kind of walked people through some of the capacities that are required to empathetically listen.
Yeah, and it does definitely sound like what you were alluding to earlier, which is the mindfulness practices and the emotional awareness and intelligence practices really play an important role in bringing, as you said, paying attention to your own experience and the experience of the other.
Absolutely. I think the first time I did this kind of listening was at Search Inside Yourself, when I did the generous listening, and really it listened intentionally, quieting myself, not only audibly, but trying to both quiet myself and pay attention to the chatter that came up internally. And it's right along those same lines, except really even going further than quieting oneself, and stepping into the feelings that you're hearing coming from the other person.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll ask Grace to, if you could maybe send over a link. On YouTube, you have a channel, the Just Listen Project, where you actually have videos of some of these conversations that you have participated in, that others have participated in. So it's a great kind of way to, although I would encourage people not to look at that right now, so that you don't multitask, that you're still here, but perhaps afterwards. And then you will also send a link, obviously, to Search Inside Yourself, because a lot of these practices are within our core curriculum as well. So that being said, Toussaint, I know that a lot of this has been, you're in a unique position, right? Where as the CEO, you've been a leader who embraced these practices. I want to ask you about the flip side of that, where you have leadership or cultures or organizations in which this is not something that is well regarded or commonly accepted as a set of practices. What are the challenges? What do you think? What have you heard? What have you seen are some of the challenges in doing this work?
Yeah, so for me, this is a very very search inside yourself aligned approach to inclusion and belonging in the workplace, because my intent has been to meet people where they are, and speak the language that people value in the workplace. And so this has been less about sort of that dehumanization that I talked about, and more about the rehumanization. So in terms of meeting resistance, there hasn't been a ton. Part of the challenge has been realizing that there's not that many of these conversations available. Because a lot of these conversations sit on top of diversity, right? So you have potentially one Black person or one person of color in a workplace, and so you have to be aware of kind of overburdening that person with 100 phone calls wanting to have this conversation, or kind of tokenizing that person and having that person do everyone's work. So part of what I've been talking about subsequent to just that kind of framework that I walked through is really another concept that I touched on in the first video I did for the Just Listen project, which is this kind of 1% action and getting 1% outside of our comfort zones in a way that's in integrity with us. So maybe it's not a conversation that one can have, or maybe that's not available within our networks, but really doing your own work to find meaning and find healing from this dehumanization. So starting with where we feel that most acutely, and reflecting on that, and a lot of that requires, again, mindfulness and kind of sitting in non-judgmental awareness of what our own internal stuff is around all these issues. I think there's a collective grief that I think many of us recognize, but taking that to an individual level and seeing where we're healing that, feeling that individually is part of the work. And then for me, I think the reason why this has resonated with people and even been uplifting is the next step we go to is envisioning rehumanization. I think that's something that's not talked about enough. I think a lot of the energy that I hear, see, and feel is around stopping what's going on right now. Like, what can we do to stop this, or what can we do to fix what's wrong? But like taking the time to sit in vision with what right looks like, what right feels like. For example, for me, where I've felt dehumanization most acutely is anti-Black racism. What rehumanization looks like is thriving of Black people in Black communities. I can see, if I close my eyes, these schools that are flourishing, and young Black children in previously underserved areas doing things and getting access to things like programs in nature, corporate opportunities, and expanded sort of perspective that comes with the variety of experience of children in other communities. I see like a healing version of parenting. I see entrepreneurship growing. I can envision what thriving looks like, and that brings a different sort of action to move toward that vision and energy than the sort of against energy that goes to just fixing dehumanization. And there's a place for that energy, but to be exclusively in that domain causes a different response, not only from leaders, but it also causes a different kind of experience and a different kind of fuel for ourselves. So going there and then thinking about what resources I have then to bring people to that rehumanization vision, and having people think individually about what resources they have. And then coming out of that, I've been asking people to think about what a 1% use of those resources, or a 1% action would look like. So meaning getting 1% outside of your comfort zone, using those resources that you've thought of to go toward that rehumanization vision. That's not a conversation that really makes available a lot of resistance. I think left at that level, it certainly offers people of all perspectives opportunities to engage with that process.
So I love that idea that, like, this is envisioning, you called it envisioning rehumanization as a mindfulness practice.
Yeah,
And I'm not trying to just collapse everything into mindfulness here,
it
but
is. No,
as a
I see it.
practice. You see it that way, yeah. So is there a specific practice? You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking maybe we should try it together. We have a request, could we watch the video? But I'd prefer, because you can watch that asynchronously. In other words, you can, after this webinar, you can watch the Just Listen videos. But since we have you live, and since we're talking about practice, and further, since we're talking about a practice that's about reimagining a better future, other possibilities, this is not a common set of practices that's widely necessarily known in what's sometimes referred to as mindfulness practices. I mean, certainly it is. We teach it actually at SIY, but specifically applied to rehumanization, that's really compelling. So I wonder, is this a practice that perhaps we could try now? Is that something, would you be able to try facilitating some of that with us?
Oh, not at all. Yes.
All right.
So yeah, yeah. Let's go through it, because I think I'll have to start at dehumanization, with, in keeping with my not wanting to skip. And so, as I make up this practice on the spot, I'm regulating my internal experience here for sure. If we close our eyes and we really go to first, taking a few breaths, breathing in deeply, feeling the seat underneath us, feeling our feet underneath us. Making space for whatever we've showed up with today. As we continue to breathe intentionally, allowing ourselves to tiptoe toward some of what we're grieving. That could be political discord. That could be racial discord. That could be feelings of being unheard from a gender perspective, from a sexuality perspective. Where for yourself do you feel humanity is not able to show up most fully? Whether it's your own humanity or whether it's something that you sense in the humanity of another that's not invited to show up fully. Sitting with that dehumanization for a moment. Recognizing that dehumanization as a human loss. If sadness comes up, feeling that sadness. If anger comes up, feeling that anger. From that place, beginning to, again, tiptoe to a different vision. What does beginning to heal that loss look like? Beginning to heal from that loss. What does a world where that humanity is fully recognized look like? What does a world where we fully recognize the humanity of another? If you're feeling a division, what does a world look like where two people with two different viewpoints fully recognize the humanity of another, even as they may disagree on something substantive? If you're recognizing underrepresentation and rehumanizing that, what does a world look like where a human being who has up to this point been unheard, underappreciated, or undervalued, what does fully valued look like for that human being? What does it look like to embrace our differences? What does it look like to embrace those who we may have dismissed? What does that world feel like? What is that world what's happening in that world that has human interactions and human recognition such that you can half smile a little bit about the way it looks and feels? What's going on with people inside that world? What's going on with that dehumanization that you once felt inside of that world? Thinking creatively, what resources do you have today, assuming you have some resources, to begin to tiptoe from that dehumanization and that dehumanized world toward that rehumanization vision that you just brought to mind and heart? I invite everyone to reflect on that rehumanization vision, spend some time sitting there, and also reflect on what resources you can stretch to move your world toward that world. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, thank you. So important to be able to envision something different. And I really appreciate, first of all, you spontaneously offering a practice to enable us to do that. So thank you for that. And I would invite, please, of course, any attendees, anyone who's listening to this, to chat in any of your reflections as well. And questions, comments. This is our time together. So lots of thanks coming in and gratitude, as you see here. What else, I guess, then becomes one of the questions you see here, which is which practice is in addition to deep listening, and now I would add envisioning.
Yeah.
What other practices contribute to this sense of inclusion and rehumanization in the workplace?
Yeah, so I feel like my wife makes fun of me for throwing out all these books. I'm like a freak for these self-improvement and these business books, but they all so mindfulness comes in, all of these things come in. My latest has been a book called Stretch by Scott Sonenshine. And one of the things that he talks about in that book is this idea of stretching versus chasing. And a lot of it is in the business context, where we are chasing these resources that we think we need. And, venture capital funding is in vogue. So we're chasing this capital in order to bring about this vision for a business, or we're chasing this resource because we need that resource in order to make the change that we seek to make for the world. And what he offers is that there is a great value, and he also offers the research and evidence behind this. There's a great value to this idea of stretching. And looking to the resources that we already have, and creatively using those resources, asking ourselves to be creative with those resources in order to accomplish the goals that we have. And that's transformative, not only for the outcomes that we're seeking, but also transformative for us internally. So I would also offer another reflective practice on stretching, to think about what resources that we have to bring about that rehumanization vision. Some of the obstacles that I ran into were people, like I said, saying that I don't have this conversation available to me. But we do have more resources than we realize available to us to make the change that we seek to make. And so one of the practices that I would offer is reflection on what resources that we have. My mom, in her sort of Louisiana Southern wisdom, used to say, bloom from where you're planted. So what opportunities do we have to bloom from where we're planted in order to bring about the vision that we hope to bring about? A lot of this, again, sits on top of mindfulness, because this is a vulnerable place. I think this area, dehumanization, racism, political division, all forms of division, oppression, is fraught with shame, fear, trauma. And when we have all of those things at play, like the idea of taking the wrong step could be paralyzing. And I think it is paralyzing for a lot of us. If it's not helplessness and hopelessness, it's the fear of making things worse than they already are. But all of that is an opportunity to hide too. And so stepping out and taking vulnerable action on the assumption that we have something that could pull the world closer to our vision, it is a practice that I would certainly offer. It's one that I've guided people through. Was, so those first two steps of dehumanization reflection and rehumanization reflection, in order to get to action. The next reflection that we had was on these resources that we had. Like, what do we have available to us? And then from there, what does a start look like? What is a sustainable? And so the practices that I would offer are reflections on those last two pieces. What is a sustainable? What do our resources look like? What do we have available? Whether that's expanding our networks, and if you don't have an immediate person with a loving and trusting enough relationship to have a conversation with, can you put yourself in a context that would grow your capacity for empathy? And so for me, as an underrepresented professional, I'm dropping myself into a workplace with people who come from very different cultures on a daily basis. And I'm usually the only, whether that's in my own workplace or whether that's at a conference in my industry. Can you drop yourself into a situation where you may be the only? Can you yield the privilege of being in the majority? What might that do for empathy? Can you invite someone into your network who may not have access to your network? I think in terms of networks, in terms of the power that we all have individually to create structure and to create opportunity, that's an underappreciated form of advocacy. So just reflecting on those resources, and then reflecting on what a sustainable start looks like. I am not interested in convincing someone to take any action that's not in integrity with themselves and that stretches them beyond what they can sustain. So to me, the idea of going 1% outside of our comfort zones repeatedly is something that I think will kind of aggregate or compound into a more powerful form of change than people jumping out and really taking this kind of fueled by fire energy. Like this, I imagine just kind of a slow and steady and warm fire in a fireplace, rather than this fire that consumes the building. And I think we're more likely to get where we're hoping to go with that slow and steady, warm fire, at least for some of this individual work. I want to be clear that I get that huge and big and broad sweeping change and loud change is necessary in a lot of contexts, particularly institutional and systemic racism and kind of changing culture. Loud is helpful. But as we start to think through what our own individual work is and what we would like that work to be, I think that slow and steady warm fire, that 1% outside of our comfort zones is more likely to lead to something lasting.
Yes, thank you so much. Ah, that's beautiful. I love your mom's wisdom. Bloom where you're planted. I mean, that kind of says it all. But I do love also how you've kind of articulated this as kind of 1% outside of your comfort zone, being aware of your own resources, whatever they are, in whatever degree you possess them, however they look, whatever that means for you in your life. And then a sustainable start. I mean, these are all your words, by the way. I just was taking notes. These are such beautiful ways to present this set of practices around inclusion, and from the standpoint also of mindfulness and EI leading to equity and inclusion. So Thank you for articulating all of that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's yeah, and thank you for listening and reflecting. I think it's for me, if I had to kind of put a overarching concept on it, it's making this stuff personal, right? Feeling it at a personal level and at a human level, and feeling where the hurt is, feeling where we're feeling that loss, like envisioning at a personal level, and feel it like your own vision for a better world, a rehumanized world, feeling your own, in seeking and exploring your own resources, not what you find on a checklist necessarily, although there are great resources out there. I'm not telling people not to go and look at resources on anti-racism, but really kind of getting in touch with what you have available and what you think would be your what are your superpowers in the rehumanizing realm, and then also feeling what your own personal capacity is. So really making this work personal is what I would say people can take away from all of that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, I know the chat has actually been very active, and I've been listening, so I haven't paid much attention, but fortunately Grace has, and I know you've been monitoring the chat and some questions and comments, Grace. So if you wouldn't mind just perhaps sharing a few of those with us for Toussaint.
Sure, absolutely. So there's one that came in from Asa. She asks, could you tell us more about the mindfulness practices that you've integrated specifically in your own workplace? And I think maybe also a question on top of that could be, how do you start? Where do you start bringing in these practices? How does that look? And then a second question from Martha is, what's the balance between resources and the doing and the danger of blind white saviorism? So there's a couple of questions for you.
Yeah. So I'll go with Asa's first. Hi, Asa. So Asa was in my cohort. I'm a SIY teacher training dropout. I tried to take on teacher training at the same time as I took on the CEO role for the first time leaving law. It didn't work out very well. Fortunately, I didn't get dropped from here. I dropped SIY. Anyway, hi, Asa. So in terms of my workplace, oddly enough, or funny enough, ironically, the Just Listen project was propelled by one of our just general workplace mindfulness practices. And so when we have our all hands meeting, the first thing we do is drop in. And so we'll do a general kind of 5-minute mindfulness reflection. And then from there, we do what we call a one-word check-in. And so we do one word about whatever came up during that kind of dropping in moment, or whatever's existing for people as they show up, and then just kind of an explanatory sentence. And for me, the first time I ever mentioned anything about racism at work was, I think, the Tuesday after I learned about George Floyd's killing. I could barely exist at work, but the only one word I could kind of utter was distracted. And then, so through that one word check-in, I said distracted, and then all of this stuff came up, and we had this really kind of deep and heartfelt discussion about racism and about what was going on, and that led to an even further and deeper and tearful discussion with another one of my colleagues, which eventually kind of led me to launch the project. So that check-in, and I think it's not just for this stuff. I think when you have that meaningful kind of check-in where you allow people to say a bit about how they're showing up is really something that served us well. The foundation that we talk about for what we're seeking at work is loving and trusting relationships, and that first mindfulness practice, and then the check-in has certainly promoted that form of relationship, for that quality of relationship for us. You're absolutely. I can't remember who asked what the name of the person was, so I apologize.
Martha asked the second question, but Grace, what was that?
Okay. Yeah, and so on the second question, the white saviorism piece is very, very difficult. So one of the things that we talk about leading up to the Just Listen project is overburdening and tokenizing. And so being very, and so that's a different concept than white saviorism. But first being clear that the Black sharer is not doing the work of the white person it is a big thing. And then the white saviorism piece is interesting because to some extent, yes.
Can you just define what that is a bit? Like, could you just maybe define what white?
So the idea of making recentering the sort of racial progress on the white person who's helping to save. For the white savior, there has to be a victim, right? There's a victim who's being saved. And so it puts this kind of, it reinstitutes some form of inferiority, or at least the perception of some form of inferiority. And there's this rush to action and kind of savior perception, savior mentality. However, I would say, don't allow that to be armor. So don't allow that fear or that protection to be armor that keeps anyone from taking meaningful action or action that's in integrity. There is a danger that your action will be received exactly like that. And I think that vulnerability and that sort of courage is part of what we'll need to move toward progress. I'm doing the Just Listen project, having no prior background in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure there's plenty of people who find that offensive, who find that wrong, uninformed. I am sure are plenty of people who disagree with me, and I know I've heard people disagree that we should be asking colleagues of color, Black and other people of color, to talk about what they're doing, or sharing that stuff, or putting them in a position where they feel like they have to talk about their own experiences. Like, there is so much that we're going to get wrong in these conversations, and that we're going to have to iterate and improve. And I think we know that to be a part of problem solving and a natural consequence of trying to do something different or trying to create change in other contexts. We just don't bring that wisdom and that approach and that respect for failure and obstacles and iterating and feedback loops. We're not bringing that same problem-solving approach to these issues of social justice. And I think that's a disservice to these issues. The unwillingness to step in and get it wrong. Yes, you may get it wrong. Yes, you might step in and might feel that white savior perception and role exactly. And you may be told that vulnerability and your willingness to step in and have a friend or colleague or a non-friend or a person of color say, what in the heck are you doing here? Like, this is not your story, or this is not your role, or we don't need you here, is a gift. Like, the relinquishing of the privilege not to take action is a gift. The relinquishing of the privilege not to take action that you know to be the right and perfect action is a gift. And so I would say, yes, be aware of that and the dynamics of that. Be aware of things like re-traumatizing, but offer that gift. Offer the gift of having a willingness to take the wrong action for the sake of taking some action.
Thank you. Wow. Yes. We have time for maybe one more question. It's a good one. I want to share it. Came in through the Q&A from Jay. So thank you for this, Jay. The questions are really around optionality. Inclusion is about feeling free to bring your whole self to work, but sometimes people aren't ready yet. Similarly, group mindfulness practice is powerful, but can't be forced on people. How do you find the right balance in both inclusion and mindfulness between encouraging people to participate and respecting optionality, or their option to opt out, basically?
That is a beautiful and important point, and I'm so glad that was brought up. I'm not even encouraging people to participate. Like, let me be clear. This is an offer. So I've not gone to any workplace or any group and said to anyone on the listener side or the sharer side, this is something I think you should do, because there may be an equal number of people who aren't ready to do this form of sharing as are. What I saw was a gap. I know for myself, if I was out there and I was ready and I felt better after telling my story to someone who I knew would value my story, I knew there must be others, but absolutely leaving each person in these conversations, or who's offered these conversations, with full agency over these conversations. So full when I've talked to people about asking for these conversations, so asking for someone to share their story, like going overboard with the clarity that this is a request for the benefit of the listener. This is an invitation. This is not a demand. This is not an encouragement. This is not something that you're telling the sharer they should do, but this is a gift. Like the offer, or the ask, is a gift. It's relinquishing the privilege to sit on the sidelines of this conversation. But the agency always has to be left, particularly with the person, the would-be sharer. And at every stage in the Just Listen project, we're reminding people of that agency. So after every conversation, I'm asking people whether it's okay, even the recorded ones, asking people whether it's okay to even share that conversation. I have the sharer ask after that conversation's done, even if we're not going to share the recording, whether it's okay to share the listener's story beyond the two of them. But at every stage, it's super important, and thank you, Jay, to be very clear that there is full agency left with the would-be sharer, and also the would-be listener.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we're going to have to stop because I'm aware of the time. But what I would say to everyone is, the good news is, Toussaint, you're officially a part of our advisory board. So I'm hoping we're going to see more of you on events like this and so forth. And you'll be advising here at SIYLI. So you're part of our community, and we're just so happy to have you in our presence in that way. And gosh, the world needs more leaders like you.
Well, I would say the same, and thank you. And SIYLI's been such an important part of my own journey that however I can support, I'm so happy to.
Thank you so much, my friend. And thank you all for being here today. I've really appreciated everybody has pretty much stayed on the whole call and high level of engagement. So gratitude to you all who have participated and are listening. And again, recordings of this will be available onward and deeper together, my friends.
Yeah, and please feel free to engage with me mostly on LinkedIn. Reach out to me there, and then also the justlistenproject.com. You can find all the videos there now, or shoot me questions there too. But thank you all for listening.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right.